What would you do if the man who promised to never let you walk alone simply vanished on the day you needed him? Most Claire Whitmore had it all: a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a baby on the way. But on the morning she gave birth, she was alone. No phone call, no explanation, just silence echoing louder than any betrayal. A forgotten suitcase, a hotel receipt, a name that wasn't his. Claire's world didn't shatter all at once, it unraveled, thread by careful thread. What do you do when the truth doesn't scream, but whispers from the edges of the life you thought was yours? If you were Claire, would you fight for clarity or cling to the comfort of illusion? Would you protect the truth for your child's future or protect your child from the truth? This isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's about a woman who chose strength over silence and motherhood over martyrdom. Stay with us, because what she discovered may feel far too familiar. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, and let's begin this unforgettable journey. The room was quiet, save for the steady hum of hospital machines and the occasional shuffle of nurses in the hallway. Rain tapped gently against the window. In her arms, Claire Whitmore held her newborn son, wrapped in a pale blue blanket. The soft rise and fall of his tiny chest was the only rhythm that made sense in a world that had suddenly fallen still. Claire stared at the closed door, half expecting it to swing open, for anyone to come in and say it was all just a misunderstanding. But no one came. The only thing that greeted her was silence, deafening, suffocating silence. Earlier that morning, just before the sun had risen, Claire had gone into labor unexpected, a few weeks early, but not alarming. What was alarming was the empty side of the bed when she reached for her husband. James was gone. His phone was off. His last text, sent at midnight, simply said, "Big deal closing tomorrow. Be back in time. Love you." She had believed him, even after all the missed dinners, the unexplained absences, the sudden business trips to nowhere. Claire had believed in James, because once upon a time, he was the man who looked into her eyes and said, "You'll never have to go through anything alone again." And now, here she was, alone. The irony was bitter. James Callahan, the man Fortune magazine had called a visionary titan with a heart for family, was currently off the coast of Santa Catalina, sipping champagne on a private yacht with investors. Pictures were already flooding social media. He in a tailored white linen shirt, laughing with a dark-haired woman in sunglasses. Claire had seen it just an hour before being wheeled into delivery. At first, she felt nothing. Then, as the contractions built, the pain cracked open something deeper, a grief she hadn't known she was carrying. Not just over James's absence, but over the realization that the life she had built was not what it seemed. A nurse entered the room with a clipboard, offering a kind smile and asking if she'd decided on a name. Claire hesitated. Months ago, she and James had circled a few names: Ethan, Blake, Mason, but none of those felt right now. None of them belonged to the child she had just brought into the world by herself. She looked down at the baby, his face scrunched from sleep. A name floated to her, unplanned, unshared. "Lucas," she whispered. "His name is Lucas." The nurse nodded and jotted it down, sensing the weight behind her voice. Later that day, when her best friend from college, Marianne, arrived breathless and teary-eyed, Claire finally allowed herself to cry. Not loud sobs, just quiet, exhausted tears that slid down her cheeks as she held Lucas close. Marianne didn't ask about James. She didn't need to. In the hours that followed, Claire's mind drifted back to the first moment she met James. The spark, the promises, the laughter. She held those memories like photographs from a life that no longer belonged to her. The woman in those memories was hopeful, untouched by betrayal. Now, as the sky darkened outside and the rain softened to a drizzle, Claire made a silent vow this child would never feel abandoned. She might not know exactly how yet, but she would rebuild, protect, and create something true, something that didn't depend on yacht deals or hollow apologies. Because while James missed a business meeting's worth of signatures, Claire had just signed a sacred bond with the life in her arms, and she wouldn't let go. Before she was Claire Callahan, before the glimmering wedding ring and the house on the Oregon cliffs, She was just Claire Whitmore, a girl from a place no one ever looked twice at on a map. Maple Hollow was the kind of town where the stop sign at the corner doubled as a community bulletin board. Birthdays, yard sales, lost dogs all thumbtacked in layers. Summers were hot and humming with cicadas. Winters were cold and smelled faintly of firewood and old quilted coats. People didn't lock their doors unless a big storm was coming, or unless they had something to hide. Claire grew up in a weathered two-story house with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch. Her father, Frank Whitmore, was a carpenter who spoke more through the things he built than the words he said. Her mother, June Whitmore, was a retired schoolteacher who volunteered at the town library and baked pies for church fundraisers. They were not rich, but they were honest and steady and good. Every morning before school, Claire would sit at the kitchen table sipping sweet tea with too much lemon, watching her mother hum old hymns while flipping eggs in the cast-iron skillet. That sound, the hum, the sizzle, the clink of plates, was what safety felt like, what home felt like. But even as a child, Claire carried a restlessness in her. She'd sit at the window of her attic room at night, tracing the stars, wondering what life was like beyond the hollow, not out of boredom, but from a curiosity too big to contain. She read everything she could: newspapers, novels, psychology textbooks left behind by a cousin. She wanted to understand people, their hearts, their choices, their silences. At 17, she graduated valedictorian and stunned the town by earning a full scholarship to Hudson University, a prestigious liberal arts school in New York. Some folks at the diner said she was too soft for the city, too country kind, but Claire knew better. Her gentleness wasn't weakness, it was her compass. Moving to New York was like walking into a movie she'd watched from afar her whole life. The city buzzed with ambition and chaos. For a while, Claire felt invisible, swallowed whole by subway crowds and lecture halls with professors who barely glanced up. She missed maple trees and home-cooked meals, missed the way people waved from porches, but she adapted, slowly, earned the trust of a few classmates, started volunteering at a counseling hotline, majored in psychology, and somewhere along the way, she began to understand that her softness was not a disadvantage, it was her strength. While others rushed to speak, Claire listened, deeply, thoughtfully. People told her things they hadn't said out loud in years. It was in her junior year that she met Marianne Grant, the sharp, outspoken daughter of a Boston surgeon, who became her roommate and lifelong friend. Marianne was everything Claire wasn't: loud, fearless, brash. But she loved Claire fiercely, and together they balanced each other like wind and root. When Claire doubted herself, Marianne reminded her she didn't get to Hudson on luck. She got there because she belonged. It was at one of Marianne's many charity mixers, a rooftop event raising funds for inner-city youth programs, that Claire first locked eyes with James Callahan. He was speaking with a group of donors, perfectly tailored in navy blue, his laughter warm, but calculated. Their eyes met across the room. He walked over, introduced himself with a smile that held just the right amount of mystery, and instead of making small talk, he asked, "What do you think makes a person truly seen?" Claire blinked. Not a pickup line, not a comment on her dress, a question, an invitation. They talked until the caterers started folding up tables. He listened, really listened, as Claire told him about Maple Hollow, about the people she loved and the loneliness she sometimes carried. James spoke of his early failures, of reinventing himself after a startup went belly up. He said he admired her groundedness, called it rare. At the time, Claire thought she'd found someone who didn't just look at her, but saw her. Back in Maple Hollow, her parents were skeptical. June worried he was too fast-paced. Frank just said, "People with shiny shoes don't always know how to walk through mud." But they trusted Claire, trusted the steadiness of her heart. And so, a year later, when James proposed under a grove of autumn leaves in Central Park, Claire said yes. Not because she needed to be swept away, but because she thought she'd found someone she could walk beside, hand in hand, for the long road ahead. But even as she packed up her books and favorite quilt to move into James's glass-walled house on the cliffs, Claire paused at the doorway of her old room in Maple Hollow. She ran her fingers along the windowsill, glanced once more at the stars. She whispered to the quiet, Don't let me forget who I am. She had no idea how much she would need those words. When Claire first stepped into James Callahan's world, it felt like she had walked into someone else's dream. The glass walls of his hilltop house overlooked a valley that caught the sun in ways she never thought real. The floors were smooth oak, the shelves lined with first editions and curated art. It wasn't ostentatious, it was intentional, tasteful, thoughtful, like James himself. He made her feel like the rarest thing in the room. At first, their lives orbited each other perfectly. Claire continued working part-time at a local counseling center, while James ran strategic meetings from his home office, building the next big wave of educational technology. They'd meet in the kitchen between calls. She'd pour him coffee, he'd kiss her forehead. It was simple, quiet, warm. James wasn't loud in his affection, but he noticed things: how she liked her tea strong, how her shoulders tensed when she was overthinking. He'd draw her warm baths without a word, buy her wool socks when the Oregon nights turned cold. He told her, one evening, as they lay on the couch beneath a knit throw from Maple Hollow, "You make this place feel like home, Claire. Before you, it was just expensive silence." They traveled often, long weekends in Aspen, a conference in Vancouver, even a spontaneous trip to Vermont just to see the fall foliage, because Claire mentioned once that she missed the way leaves turned in Tennessee. James chartered a flight the next morning. Their wedding was small but elegant, only 20 guests on a private vineyard in Sonoma. Claire wore a satin gown that brushed the ground like water, and James looked at her like she held every answer he'd ever wanted. Her parents cried quietly during the ceremony. Marianne gave a toast so fiery and funny that even the servers stopped to listen. In those early months, Claire believed they had found a rare kind of partnership, mutual respect wrapped in real affection. She admired his intelligence, the way he moved in a room like he knew how to command it without raising his voice. James never bragged, but his name carried weight. His company, Luminatech, was on the verge of national contracts. Investors were whispering about him as the next Elon, but more ethical, grounded. Claire never cared much for that side of his world. She'd grown up believing in what could be touched, smelled, heard. James's world moved too fast, too big. But she didn't resent it. She just stayed anchored while he soared. They agreed not to rush into starting a family, James said. "Let's build our foundation first." And Claire, too newly married and newly moved into a life far from Maple Hollow, agreed. She volunteered more, read more, redecorated corners of the house with soft textures and earthy colors. The house began to echo her voice, sometimes late at night. She'd watch James working in his office, fingers dancing over the keyboard, brows furrowed. She'd stand at the door, a cup of tea in her hands, and just watch. He was so full of ideas, so driven. She admired that, but even then tiny things started to whisper. He missed dinner once, then again. Sometimes he wouldn't come to bed until 3. She'd find him asleep on the couch, phone on his chest, screen glowing with unread emails. She'd ask, "Everything all right?" He'd smile, "Just a long day." Claire told herself that every marriage had transitions, that she just needed to give him space, that brilliance came at a cost. Still, she sometimes caught herself staring out the kitchen window, wondering when the shift had started, when we began to turn into he and I. One Sunday afternoon, Claire planned a picnic near the cliffs. She packed his favorite sandwiches, brought an old quilt, and even made lemonade from scratch. She lit candles in mason jars. James said he'd be there by 3. By 4:30, he hadn't come. By 6, the wind had picked up. And Claire sat alone, the food untouched, her cardigan wrapped tightly around her shoulders. When he came home later that evening, he looked tired. She said nothing, just smiled. That night, while folding the blanket, she found a small pine cone caught in the fabric and placed it on the windowsill, a quiet reminder of a day that could have been more. Still, love has its own kind of blindness, and Claire, despite her intuition, wasn't ready to question the ground beneath her feet. Not yet. Because he still kissed her cheek every morning, still called her his compass, still made her laugh when the world felt too heavy. And so, she held on. To the man who once asked her what it meant to be truly seen. To the version of their story that hadn't yet unraveled. There's a silence that feels peaceful, like morning light drifting through lace curtains. And then, there's the kind of silence that sits between two people at dinner. Heavy, hollow, filled with things unsaid. Claire Whitmore had begun to notice the difference. At first, she'd brushed it off. James had always been intense about work, especially when a launch was near. She was used to the rhythms of his late nights, the short answers, the distracted smiles. But lately, the rhythm had shifted. It wasn't just fatigue, it was absence. Not physical, necessarily, but emotional, like his mind had locked a door she no longer had the key to. It started with the small things. He stopped asking about her clients at the counseling center, forgot her mother's birthday, which he'd always remembered without reminders. Some mornings, he left before she woke and came home long after she had gone to bed. His hugs felt more like routine than affection. One night, Claire prepared his favorite mushroom risotto. She dimmed the lights, set the table with candles, even played that old Ella Fitzgerald record they used to love. She waited until 9. At 9:15 he called, said he was caught up in a client dinner. No apology, just a pause. Then, "Don't wait up." She didn't eat. She sat there in silence, the record still playing, her fork untouched. Across from her, his chair looked too empty, too used to being that way. Claire told herself she was overreacting, that all couples go through dry spells, that if she just stayed steady, things would circle back. She even considered initiating a weekend getaway, just the two of them, back to Vermont maybe. But every time she brought it up, James would say, "Now's not the best time. Things are moving fast at Luminatech," and she believed him. Until the Sunday afternoon, she found his suitcase packed. She wasn't snooping. She was looking for one of his old sweatshirts to wear while gardening. But there it was in the back of the closet, zipped and ready. A small detail, but so out of place, it made her breath hitch. When James came home, she asked gently, "Are you traveling soon?" He blinked. "What?" She pointed toward the closet. "Your bag's packed." For a split second, just one, his face changed. A flicker of something. Guilt, surprise, annoyance. Then he smiled. Too quickly. "Oh, that's for a potential investor meeting in Phoenix. Wasn't sure if it would happen. Didn't want to bother you until it was confirmed." She nodded slowly. "You didn't mention it." James walked to the kitchen, opening the fridge as if the conversation had ended. "I meant to. Sorry." That night, as he slept beside her, Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her heart didn't feel broken. Not yet. But something was loosening, quietly, painfully. She began to notice patterns, how his phone never left his side, how he took certain calls only outside, whispering on the porch, how he suddenly had a new assistant, someone named Vanessa, whom he mentioned too casually for someone who had never once appeared in meetings before. Claire didn't want to be the wife who checked phone logs, who sniffed shirts for perfume. That wasn't her. She was from Maple Hollow. She believed in talking things through, in giving space, in trust that was earned and kept. But what do you do when trust isn't broken loudly? What do you do when it simply erodes? One evening, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, when James walked by and didn't even glance her way. No kiss on the shoulder. No. "You look tired today." Just a flat good night, and the click of his office door behind him. She sat down on the edge of their bed and held her brush like it might anchor her. In the quiet, her reflection stared back at her strong, but weary, beautiful, but unacknowledged. She whispered to herself, "Don't disappear. Claire, please don't disappear." The next day, she called Marianne. "I don't know what's wrong," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know if it's something, or if I'm imagining it." Marianne didn't hesitate. "You're not imagining anything. You've always felt things before they hit the surface." "But what if I'm wrong?" Claire asked. "What if I start accusing, and it's all just work stress or worse? What if I'm right and everything breaks? Marianne's tone softened. Honey, sometimes things break whether you open your eyes or not. Claire hung up the phone and sat in her garden for a long time, pulling weeds that weren't really there, just to keep her hands moving. Somewhere deep inside, a voice she had long buried began to rise. It didn't say, he's cheating. It didn't say, he's lying. It said something much harder to face. You are becoming a stranger in your own life. And for Claire Whitmore, the girl who always listened, who always gave space, that realization hurt more than anything else. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when Claire Whitmore stood barefoot on the cold tile of her bathroom, staring at two pink lines. The world didn't shift immediately. There was no rush of joy, no tears. Just stillness, a sharp inhale, and a trembling hand that clutched the edge of the sink. A baby. For a long moment, she stayed there, watching the light from the window spill across the floor. Her heartbeat wasn't fast, but it wasn't steady either. It felt like the quiet thrum of something ancient and sacred awakening. She walked to the bedroom, test in hand, and sat on the edge of the bed. She waited for James to come home from his early gym session. She imagined how she might tell him maybe wrap the test in a small box, or write, "Hello, Daddy" on a card. She thought about filming his reaction, something sweet to look back on. But when James walked in, sweaty and distracted, phone pressed to his ear, those ideas floated away. He mouthed "client call," kissed her cheek, and walked straight into the office. Claire sat in silence for another 20 minutes before knocking gently. James. He looked up, a little startled. "I have something to tell you," she said softly. He put his phone down and leaned back. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Claire smiled. "I'm pregnant." For a second, he didn't react. Then his eyes widened. A breath caught in his throat, and he crossed the room to pull her into a hug. "That's wow," he whispered. "That's amazing, Claire." He kissed her forehead, held her tightly, and for a few seconds, she allowed herself to believe that maybe this was the moment things would change. And for a while they did. James started coming home earlier. He attended the first few doctor's appointments with her, held her hand during ultrasounds, and even picked out nursery colors online. He suggested names Graham if it was a boy, Lila if a girl. At night, he'd talk to her belly, whisper silly things, play jazz records, and claim it would make the baby smarter. Claire found herself smiling again. There was laughter in the house, lightness, a new rhythm. But like so many things with James, it didn't last. By the middle of her second trimester, the late nights returned, the closed office door, the rushed kisses, the missed meals. This time, Claire didn't ask. She watched. She noted the way his shoulders tightened with each phone call, the way he snapped at small things, the way the warmth began to fade from his voice. He blamed stress, said funding was tight, said expansion plans were faltering. Claire nodded. She understood the weight of pressure. She'd counseled people through it. But what she couldn't understand, what she wouldn't accept, was the growing emptiness between them. One night, after throwing up for the third time that day, Claire sat on the bathroom floor, knees drawn to her chest, and whispered, "I wish you could just be here." She wasn't asking for miracles, just presence, just someone to hold her hair back and say, "You're not alone in this." But she was. The next morning, James was gone before sunrise. She texted him later. "Felt really sick last night. Might need to slow down." He replied hours later. "Sorry. Crazy day. You'll be okay. You're strong. Strong." She reread that word again and again, and in a strange way, it felt like both a compliment and a dismissal. Claire started talking to the baby when she was alone. She'd lie on the couch, one hand on her growing belly, whispering little stories. Sometimes she'd play her father's old gospel tapes. Other times, she just closed her eyes and let the silence speak back. "You're not here yet," she'd say, "but you're already the reason I'm still breathing some days." At her 24-week checkup, the doctor warned her about stress. Her blood pressure was high. She needed more rest, more calm. Claire nodded, took the printed advice, and tucked it into her purse. She knew the signs, but knowing didn't mean changing. When she told James, he offered to send her to a spa, said she needed pampering, said he'd cover everything. She didn't want a spa. She wanted him. His time. His voice. His steady hand at 3 when the baby kicked too hard. But she said nothing, because by now, silence felt safer than asking for things he couldn't or wouldn't give. One rainy evening, she stood by the nursery window, watching the wind blow leaves across the yard. The crib had arrived that morning, still boxed in the hallway. She hadn't built it yet. Somehow, opening the box felt like an invitation to hope, and hope had begun to feel dangerous. Still, as she stood there, arms wrapped around her belly, she made a quiet promise. No matter who's here, no matter who's not, I will love you with everything I have. She didn't know then that those words would carry her through storms she hadn't yet seen. But somewhere inside, she sensed it. Hope wasn't loud. It was the quiet flicker of light she kept alive when the rest of the world stopped showing up. The first spark didn't come from a dramatic confession or a hidden message. It came from something far more ordinary, a receipt. Claire found it tucked between the pages of a notebook on James's desk. She hadn't been snooping. She was looking for a pen to jot down the name of a baby book Marianne had recommended. The notebook was closed, but something protruded slightly from the edge, a folded piece of glossy paper. She pulled it out, thinking it was another invoice or product spec, but when she opened it, her heart stilled. It was a hotel receipt. The Monarch Grand, Seattle, a corner suite, 3 nights, 2 spa services, a bottle of vintage champagne. Dates 2 weeks ago, the exact weekend James had told her he was in Phoenix, finalizing a software partnership. Claire blinked, reading the receipt again, then again, and something inside her, something soft and believing, quietly cracked. She didn't confront him that night, or the next. Instead, she placed the receipt inside a drawer and tried to go about her days. She cooked, folded baby clothes. Even smiled politely when James came home late again, mumbling about a delayed flight, but every word felt distant, echoed. When she looked at him now, it was as if she was seeing a stranger in the shape of her husband. A few days later, she called Marianne. "Do you remember that woman he mentioned, Vanessa?" Claire's voice trembled. The assistant, "Yes. Do you think he's seeing her?" Marianne paused. "Claire, I don't want to say anything that'll hurt more than help, but I never liked how conveniently she started showing up in conversations. You need to trust your instincts." "I don't know what I'm seeing anymore," Claire whispered. "I want to believe I'm wrong. I want this to be nothing, but the receipt isn't nothing." Claire closed her eyes. "No, it's not." That evening, she waited for James to return. She sat on the sofa, back straight, hands folded. Her belly was heavy now, 31 weeks and counting. Lucas kicked gently beneath her palm, like a quiet reminder of what mattered most. James walked in around 9:00. He looked surprised to see her awake. "Hey," he said, slipping off his coat. "Did you eat?" She didn't answer right away. She reached into the side drawer and pulled out the receipt, unfolding it with calm precision. She placed it on the coffee table between them. "What's this?" he asked. "You tell me." James glanced at the paper, and for the briefest moment, just one breath, Claire saw something real flash across his face. Not confusion, not concern, fear. He recovered quickly. Too quickly. "Oh, that's business. Vanessa booked the room for an investor. I just handled the billing on behalf of the company." "Champagne and spa treatments?" Claire asked. Her voice even. She was entertaining the client's wife. They have a more personal, hands-on approach. It's a finesse game. Claire sat very still. "Were you there?" James looked at her, then away. "I dropped by briefly." "I see." She didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't even blink. James leaned forward. "Claire, please. You're exhausted. You're pregnant. This isn't the time to spiral into theories. I love you. I'm here. Aren't I? Claire looked at him carefully. You're here, she said, but you've been somewhere else for a long time. He opened his mouth to speak but said nothing. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the receipt pressed between pages of her journal like a fossil. She wasn't sure what hurt more, what she suspected, or how easily James had lied to her face. By morning, the decision had formed. She would no longer wait for truth to stumble into the room. She would find it herself. Later that week, she called Marcus Gentry, a former client she had helped during his custody battle years ago. He now worked as a licensed private investigator. When Claire explained her situation, Marcus listened in silence. Then he said simply, "Send me what you have. I'll start digging." It wasn't revenge Claire wanted, it was clarity. Because what terrified her wasn't betrayal. It was the thought of raising a child in a house built on illusions. The first contraction came just after 4 a.m. Claire Whitmore had been up since 3, unable to sleep, her mind caught in a storm of thoughts she couldn't settle. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, dusting the edge of the balcony with a thin veil of white. Inside, the nursery was nearly complete, crib assembled, blankets folded, books lined on the shelf. Everything was ready. Everything, except the man who was supposed to be there. James had left the day before for what he called an urgent investor retreat in California. Claire hadn't asked. She hadn't even reacted when he kissed her forehead, promised to be reachable, and walked out the door. She had stopped hoping by then. When the second contraction hit, she clutched the side of the kitchen counter, sharp, low, then gone. Her breath quickened. She reached for her phone and dialed James's number, voicemail. She tried again, straight to voicemail. She moved slowly to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to focus, to breathe. Her doctor had said first labors were often long, but something inside her, some primal, quiet wisdom, told her this was moving faster than expected. Another contraction, stronger. She called Marianne. "Claire, are you okay? I think it's time. I'm coming. Don't move. I'll call an ambulance too." Within 15 minutes, flashing red and white lights painted the front of the house. Paramedics moved quickly, carefully. Claire was helped onto a stretcher, wrapped in blankets, her breath short but steady. Her hand gripped her phone. Still no message from James. In the back of the ambulance, with the siren wailing through the cold morning streets, Claire stared at the ceiling and let tears slide quietly down her temples. She wasn't scared of the pain. She wasn't even scared of the birth. She was scared of what came after, of how to carry all this alone. Not just the baby, but the grief, the anger, the disappointment that clung to her like a second skin. At the hospital, the staff moved with calm urgency. A kind nurse named Laura stayed by Claire's side, whispering encouragement, wiping her brow, telling her she was doing beautifully. The room was bright, too bright. Claire asked once more if someone could call James. They tried. No answer. The hours blurred, pain crested and crashed, and through it all, Claire held herself together, piece by fragile piece. She whispered to the baby, "We're almost there, little one. I've got you." And when the final moment came, when she screamed and pushed and broke herself open, the world shifted. The room filled with a sound more powerful than any she'd ever known. A cry. Her baby's cry. The nurse placed the tiny boy in her arms, damp and warm and real. His face scrunched, fists tight, lungs strong. Claire stared at him through a haze of sweat and tears. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi. Lucas." His eyes fluttered. He made a small, hiccuping sound, and in that moment, something inside her clicked into place. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was fierce, bone-deep purpose. Later, Marianne arrived, pale and breathless, rushing to Claire's side and wrapping both mother and child in a gentle embrace. Her eyes searched the room, then narrowed. "Where is he?" Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. The absence was its own answer. The sun rose slowly outside, casting a soft gold across the hospital floor. Nurses came and went. Paperwork was filled out. A birth certificate was printed. Claire held the pen for a moment, hovering over the line marked "Father." Then quietly, deliberately, she left it blank. That night, as Lucas slept in the bassinet beside her, Claire sat in the low light of the hospital room, watching the snow drift down like ash. Her body ached, her eyes burned, but her spirit, it had never felt stronger, because now there was no room left for illusions. No more waiting, no more hoping that someone else would show up to save her. She was the one holding the line now, and she would not let go. Claire Whitmore had always believed that truth didn't scream, it whispered, sometimes from behind a door, sometimes from the silence between words. And now, she was listening. It had been 9 days since Lucas was born, 9 days of long nights, soft lullabies, and quiet tears. 9 days without a word from James. No call, no text, no flowers at the hospital, no footsteps in the hallway, just silence. At first, she thought he might show up, maybe with some grand excuse. Maybe with shame in his eyes and a promise to do better. But Claire knew better now. People don't disappear by accident, they vanish by choice. So, when Marcus Gentry knocked on her door that Wednesday afternoon, carrying a manila folder and a laptop, Claire didn't flinch. She opened the door, offered him coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with her newborn sleeping nearby. "You sure you want to see all this?" Marcus asked. Claire nodded. "I need to know who I'm protecting my son from." Marcus opened the folder. "First off," he said, "James Callahan isn't just James Callahan." Claire frowned. "What do you mean? He changed his name 6 years ago. Legally, yes, but not publicly. Before that, he was James Delaney, co-founder of a failed fintech company that collapsed under a fraud investigation. Charges were dropped, but only because one of the partners took the fall." Claire leaned back, stunned. He never mentioned that. Of course not. And there's more. Marcus showed her hotel logs, bank transfers, emails, dates, names, locations. James had stayed in multiple cities under alternate names: Jay, Monroe, Evan Daniels, Callan West, each time tied to business meetings with the same recurring guest, Vanessa Monroe. Claire took a deep breath. "Is it an affair?" "Looks like more than that," Marcus said. "She's connected to at least 2 shell companies James wired funds to. They're laundering money, using fake education platforms as a front for moving investor cash offshore." Claire's stomach twisted. Her mind flashed to all those nights she sat waiting at the dinner table, to the plans they made for their child's future, to the nursery she painted in muted greens, all of it built on something rotten. Marcus hesitated, then added, "There's a pattern of manipulation, not just with investors, with the people around him. He's careful, but he's not clean." Claire stared at the paperwork spread across her table. "So he's not just lying to me. He's deceiving a lot of people." "Yes." "And the authorities." "Not yet. But I'm preparing a case file. If you want to report him, you'll have enough." Claire shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not ready to go public. Not until I protect Lucas legally." Marcus nodded. "Smart, but you'll need a lawyer. I know just the one," Claire said. "Eleanor Sutton." Marcus raised a brow. "She's a shark. She's also a mother. She'll understand." That night, after Marcus left, Claire sat in the nursery rocking Lucas gently. His small face was peaceful, unaware of the storm outside. She whispered to him, "You didn't ask for this, but I promise you, I won't let his lies touch you." There was no rage in her voice, no drama, just clarity. Claire wasn't seeking revenge. She wasn't trying to destroy James. She was drawing a line. The next morning, she called Eleanor. The lawyer didn't need convincing. Claire laid out the situation calmly, fact by fact. Eleanor listened carefully, then said, "We'll start with securing custody, and we'll file for divorce." Quietly, Claire said, "For now." Eleanor agreed, but eventually, This man is going to face the truth in a courtroom, and you're going to be ready. Claire hung up the phone, took a breath, and exhaled slowly. Outside, the Oregon sky was pale and overcast. The wind moved through the trees with a soft rustle. Inside, Claire felt the beginnings of a quiet storm, not one of destruction, but of strength. She was done waiting. She was done wondering. Now, it was her turn to write the story. It was strange, standing backstage in a tailored black dress, watching her name appear on the projection screen before an audience of over 200 people. Claire Whitmore, former counselor, advocate, and mother. The charity gala had been arranged months ago. Marianne had invited her as a guest, but when another speaker dropped out, Eleanor suggested an idea. You want to take your voice back? Let them hear it. And now, here she was, with Lucas asleep in Marianne's arms nearby, waiting for the MC to call her name. Claire stepped onto the stage to warm applause. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She looked out at the crowd of polished suits and pearls, media cameras, investors, some of whom she recognized from James's world. She cleared her throat and began, voice steady. I used to believe that silence was noble, that protecting people's reputations mattered more than protecting yourself. But motherhood changes things. It forces clarity. It demands truth. A ripple of attention shifted her way. You see, I married a man who could fill a room without saying a word. People called him brilliant, charismatic, ethical. They said he built things that changed the world. She paused, but what he built was a house of mirrors, and I lived inside it for years, not knowing what was real anymore. There was no anger in her voice, only clarity, only quiet power. This is not a speech about betrayal. It's about accountability. Because when someone lies to the world and to those closest to them, they don't just break trust. They steal time. They steal safety. They steal peace. Claire unfolded a single page and read excerpts, quotes from emails, financial reports, statements gathered with Marcus and Eleanor's help. She didn't name James outright. She didn't have to. By the time she finished, the room had shifted. Silence, then murmurs, then a slow, rising applause, not loud, but meaningful. After the event, reporters swarmed. She declined interviews politely. This isn't about exposure, she said. It's about truth. My son deserves it. What she hadn't expected, though, was James showing up at her door 2 days later. He looked disheveled, his once pristine demeanor now cracked at the edges. He stood on the porch with a forced smile and a leather folder in hand. Claire, he said, can we talk? She didn't move, about what he glanced around, then stepped closer. You embarrassed me. You went public without warning. You disappeared during the birth of your son, she replied evenly. I owed you nothing. James held up the folder. Look, we can fix this. I'll move some assets. Pay you out. Just don't push this further. Claire stared at him. Is that what I am to you now? A liability. He hesitated, and in that pause, she saw the full truth, not just of his betrayal, but of who he'd always been, someone who wore sincerity like a tailored suit, just convincing enough to pass. I'm not here to negotiate, James, Claire said. I'm here to protect our child, and your name won't protect him, not anymore. James's face hardened. You think you're the only one who can play this game? She tilted her head gently. No, I think I'm the only one playing it honestly. Then she closed the door. Behind her, Lucas stirred in his crib. She walked over, lifted him into her arms, and pressed her lips to his forehead. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She stood in the middle of the nursery, holding her son, knowing that the mask had finally been pulled off. Not just for the world, for herself. Healing doesn't begin with a sunrise. It begins in the quiet, in the clink of a spoon against a teacup, the soft hum of a lullaby. The moment when tears no longer fall every night, but only on some... Claire Whitmore stood at her kitchen sink, sleeves rolled, water warm. Her son Lucas sleeping nearby in a woven bassinet. The house was still, not empty quiet. For the first time in months, She wasn't waiting for a door to open, for footsteps that never came. She was simply there, present, whole, in a way that didn't require anyone else's presence. It had been 4 weeks since James's visit, 3 since she'd filed for full custody and submitted the evidence Marcus helped gather to federal authorities. 2 since the news broke quietly, then loudly, James Callahan's empire unraveling in headlines, tech visionary accused of financial misconduct, private ties, public lies, the fall of Luminatech. Claire refused every interview. Let the headlines spin. Her truth wasn't a story for them. It was a promise to her son. Eleanor handled the legal storm with surgical grace, while Marcus provided additional documentation when needed. Marianne came by often, arms full of groceries or folded laundry, acting like it was the most natural thing in the world to hold space for another woman's second beginning. But the real rebuilding, the part no one else could see, happened slowly. In Claire, each morning, she lit a small candle by the window, a ritual, a grounding, a quiet symbol that today, too, she would choose peace. She began writing again, something she hadn't done since college. Not a memoir, not yet. Just pages, truths. Letters to Lucas he'd read when he was older. Letters to herself she'd probably never read again. One read, "You are not what he made of you. You are what you survived in silence, and what you built after it." She started consulting again just a few hours a week. Clients who needed her, women going through custody battles, young girls navigating emotional abuse. Her voice, once muted, now became a balm for others. Not loud, but true. One rainy afternoon, Claire sat at a community women's center, listening to a young mother sob about a partner who gaslit her daily. Claire placed a gentle hand over hers. "The first step isn't leaving," she said. "It's remembering who you were before they made you forget." The woman looked up, stunned. Claire just smiled. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, something bloomed. One evening, as Lucas napped. Marianne and Claire sat on the porch, sipping warm cider. The sky was streaked with gold and gray. "You know," Marianne said, "you're the strongest person I know." Claire laughed softly. "Strong just means I didn't have the option to fall apart. That's the kind that matters." Marianne replied. Claire was quiet for a moment. "I used to think being loved meant being chosen over and over. And now," Claire looked out at the horizon. "Now I think it means choosing yourself when no one else will." Later that night, Claire wrapped Lucas in a soft blanket, rocked him under the glow of a dim lamp, and whispered, "Your mama's not broken, baby, just rebuilt." Lucas stirred, then smiled in his sleep. Spring arrived quietly in Oregon, not in grand sweeps, but in whispers, the slow bloom of daffodils by the fence, the soft drip of melting snow, the distant sound of children's laughter in the park across the street. Claire Whitmore stood in her garden, barefoot, a mug of chamomile in hand. Lucas was 6 months old now, sitting up, giggling with abandon. His eyes were deep and knowing, the kind that made strangers stop and smile, as if they recognized something ancient in him. And in many ways, they did. He was the boy born in silence, in absence, in pain, but raised in peace. Claire had sold the house 2 months ago. Too many memories, too many rooms that echoed with the sound of a life that never was. She'd moved into a smaller place near the river, a craftsman-style home with creaky floors, sun-drenched windows, and a porch swing where she liked to read. She didn't take much with her, just a few framed photos, her journals, and a box of baby clothes she couldn't bear to part with yet. Everything else she left behind, including his name. James Callahan's legal downfall had unfolded faster than anyone expected. Within weeks of Claire's public address, federal charges were filed, multiple lawsuits followed. Vanessa Monroe disappeared from the press just as quickly as she'd entered it. Claire never attended the hearings. She didn't need to. Eleanor sent her updates. Marcus forwarded articles. Marianne filtered out the noise, bringing only what mattered. "You've already won," Marianne had said one day. This is just paperwork." Claire nodded, but she knew something deeper. It wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming her narrative. One afternoon, she sat down at her kitchen table and pulled out a blank sheet of paper, not a journal page, not a letter to Lucas, a new beginning. At the top, she wrote, "The day I chose my name again, not Claire the wife, not Claire the betrayed, not even Claire the mother, just Claire, a woman who had walked through fire and come out not untouched but remade." She began writing not about the pain, but about the light that followed, about the women she met who reminded her of herself, about the tiny victories, a giggle from Lucas, a good night's sleep, a moment where she laughed without guilt. Eventually, that writing became a manuscript, and that manuscript became a book. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was read by the woman in Alabama who was about to leave, by the widow in New York who hadn't spoken her truth in 10 years, by the teacher in Nebraska who whispered, "Me too." Letters arrived in quiet envelopes, handwritten. "Thank you. You gave me language. I'm not alone anymore." One spring morning, Claire was invited to speak at a women's conference, this time not as a counselor, not as a former wife, but as a writer, as herself. She brought Lucas with her. As she walked on stage, heart steady, she looked out at the crowd, not at their outfits or their reactions, but their eyes like hers, once were searching. She began with no notes. "For a long time, I thought survival was the end goal, but now I know better. Survival is just the doorway. What comes after, that's the life you build, the life you choose." She paused. "I thought my story was about a man who left, but it wasn't. It was about a woman who stayed with herself. Tears didn't fall that day. They rose, in the audience, in the silence between her sentences, because they saw her not as a victim, but as a mirror." That night, Claire and Lucas watched the sunset from their porch. She held him close, cheek against his hair. "Can you believe we made it?" she whispered. Lucas, half asleep, cooed softly, and Claire smiled. Not because the pain was gone, but because she had finally learned how to carry it with grace. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who were left behind and chose to rise anyway. Claire Whitmore's story is not just about a broken marriage. It's about the quiet battles women fight behind closed doors. It's about the power to rebuild, to protect, and to rewrite a life when the world expected her to stay silent. But how many other Claires are still waiting in the shadows, in a world that still questions a woman's worth based on who she stands beside? Stories like Claire's are a quiet rebellion against betrayal, against emotional neglect, against the subtle, deep-rooted ways society dismisses a woman's pain. So if this story moved you, hold on to it, share it. Let it remind you to never look away from someone else's quiet strength. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Claire's place? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where every voice matters, every scar has meaning, and the next story might just be yours. We'll see you in the next chapter. Until then, stay strong, stay kind, and keep listening.